Marc Morano is a best-selling author, and his latest book is called The Great Reset, Global Elites. And these are the words to bear in mind: global elites and the permanent lockdown. Mark, you've been doing climate change for years, and that's basically the model that is now to be applied to the entirety of human existence, because they saw their opportunity when COVID came along.
Yes. What happened was, I've been doing climate for 2 decades plus. I go into all these UN climate summits and attending these in person. The climate activists at first were incredibly jealous of the COVID lockdowns, which happened overnight.
Yep.
And then they're like, wait a minute. They saw the opportunity. That's why Klaus Schwab came out and said this is a rare, narrow window of opportunity with these COVID lockdowns in which to reset the globe. John Kerry said the parallels between COVID and climate are screaming at us. And they really were. The same template. Climate change is make a scary prediction, say the only way we can avoid this dire end of world scenario is to go full Marxist, and we have to do it, and no dissent is allowed, and we have to go forward. We need planned recessions. We need reduced travel. We need reduced economic growth. We need stay at home. We need a Green New Deal overnight. Well, the COVID lockdowns were literally like imposing the Green New Deal overnight. So that's what happened, and that's what activated what was an academic theory for decades, this New World Order, Great Reset. It wasn't even mentioned by the World Economic Forum until 2014. Once COVID lockdowns came, in the words of the House of Commons Speaker, I think his name was Lindsay, he said, amazed at how compliant the public was during COVID. Now it's time to go after climate. They knew that they had conditioned us to accept and be compliant, and now they want to pounce on climate, and that's really what's propelling the Great Reset.
When you quote basically the words we've just heard from our new king in the beginning of the book. In some ways, this is different from the fevers that roiled the world in the 20th century, because it's very much the Anglo nations that are the craziest for this. I mean, not just people like the governor of California, but basically throughout His Majesty's dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and 3/4 of the UK had the most insane lockdowns. It is very much being dictated by the Anglo world, this, isn't it?
Yeah, this is it's a weird evolution, but what's happened was it's the idea that no one ever said no to this, whether it was climate or even the public health authorities. And in the book, I detail how these Anglos went so crazy. It all comes down to China. And you have to look back to understand the root of your question. If you go back decades, New York Times, Tom Friedman, praising China's one-party rule. Justin Trudeau, great admiration for China's basic dictatorship. UN climate chief, Christina Figueres, Obama administration officials. So what happens? COVID comes along. In the first words, the World Health Organization sends a sham committee to China, and they, after 2 or 3 days, they come back and say, if you want to know how to stop a virus, follow China. Do what China's doing. The whole world, like lemmings, jumped off a cliff and started copying the most insane authoritarian response, literally of nailing people in their home while you're wearing hazmat suits. That's what the once free West emulated. And I can't explain it other than this was unchecked ideology for years. They had never been challenged in their own world. In other words, the Justin Trudeaus and the Ardeen of New Zealand and Australian Prime Minister, they had just been in echo chambers, and this all sounded like a good idea. And at the time, hey, we've always been like China. Let's do what they're doing. And the World Health signs off on it. And so that's what happened.
Well, you're right about the Aussies and the Kiwis. What surprises me after the last couple of years, because I always love that fantastic bit of American English, ornery. Like the Americans are supposed to be ornery, and it doesn't really have an equivalent in Britannic English, that word. And what was a bit shocking to me was how half the American people were willing to put up with this.
They were. And I think one of the reasons... if Hillary Clinton were president and she had allowed the 2 weeks to flatten the curve in the United States, I think there would have been a huge rebellion. I think we now know that President Donald Trump, was literally duped by his White House COVID advisor, Deborah Birx, by Anthony Fauci. They now admit it. I mean, it's in their book.
But they boast. Deborah Birx is going around boasting about how she hornswoggled the president.
And they knew it was never going to be 15 days. So Donald Trump got into that. But had it been Hillary Clinton, I think you would have had much greater rebellion in our country from people who accepted it because they thought, okay, we have this under control. But unfortunately, once you started that 2 weeks, it was almost impossible to get out of it. We had an unprecedented situation. This is in human history. Once Free West overnight shut churches, gyms, schools, businesses, curfew, stay at home, weddings, funerals. But hey, Walmart was open, and you know, a big tech profit had created 30 billionaires an hour. It was the greatest transfer of wealth. And once this happened, I think it was so hard to get out of because no one could stand up to it. And I think the man who stood up to it, and I spent a lot of time, is Ron DeSantis in Florida. Had it not been for him paving the way for all these other Republican governors, it would have been a much longer lockdown. He paved the way and showed how you go after the public health intimidation.
Well, you make an important point here that one of the consequences of this is there's generally a transfer of power from the citizen to the bureaucrat. Because if you work for the government in the UK, in Australia, anywhere, you didn't lose a penny of pay. If you have the misfortune to work for yourself, you're screwed. And then there's the other aspect of it, which is if you have your own little mom and pop store, as they say in America, on Main Street in your little town, you're out of business, but Amazon and Walmart and all the guys who fly in their private jets to Davos to confer with Klaus Schwab, they're richer than ever. Now, you call this the permanent lockdown because they're pretty confident that they can keep a lot of this going in the years ahead. Yeah,
they build on previous crises. In other words, 9/11 in the United States, the terrorism attack, we're still under a 9/11 Emergency Power Act. That led to the creation of the Patriot Act, which gave us the surveillance state against our own citizens. Then you have COVID added. We're still under the COVID emergency. Joe Biden keeps extending it. Joe Biden now wants to add a climate emergency declaration, according to the Associated Press. Give him 130 new executive powers. The Scottish government has been trying to make the pandemic powers permanent. And we now have medical associations. Doctors can't even do research or recommendations that are contrary to public health. They can't present data if it contradicts with public health. They're trying to pass this in California. They passed it in Australia. And so it's an idea that this is going to be a new normal where the decisions are being made by fewer and fewer people. It's a concentration of power at the top, and it's about controlling the narrative on every aspect. So we are now facing thermostat controls, gas-powered car bans, and here's the key. They're intentionally collapsing our energy, our food, our transportation, and our free speech. And once they collapse it, that creates chaos. Then they claim the free market failed, and now there's a whole movement afoot to nationalize everything I just said. Food, energy, transportation, government takeover.
You know, the funny thing is, the newspapers have been full of this new lady in Italy, Giorgia Meloni, and comparing her to Hitler and Mussolini. But the dictators at their Monday night poker game in hell, when Stalin, Mao and Hitler are all sitting around, Mussolini, and they're playing cards, they must be saying, boy, saving the planet, why didn't I think of that? Because unlike fascism, communism, Nazism, Maoism, it excuses anything you want to do.
It does, and there's no criteria by which you've ever solved the climate.
No.
In 2015, they signed the UN Paris Pact, Climate Pact, and everyone from Al Gore to Barack Obama to the French president to UK, everyone's saying we've now set, this is the day our grandchildren remember we've saved the planet. Fast forward a year later, we have to save the planet all over again. Nancy Pelosi in the United States just declared that Joe Biden's pork barrel spending bill has saved the earth, that we've done it. And now they're talking about hurricane changing the trajectories with this legislation. This is medieval witchcraft they've harkened back to.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no amount of money. But the interesting thing is when it was just virtue signaling, you got the sense that a large proportion of people you know, every Sunday they'd go along to the town dump and they'd stand there. I lived in a New Hampshire town where we all had to stand there on Sunday morning and separate our glass bottles and our plastic. And then they lost the contract with the recycling thing. So after we'd resorted it, they all threw it in the back of the dumpster and then drove it 5 miles out of sight and tossed it in the landfill. It was just virtue signaling. But when they're talking about getting rid of basically individual car ownership by 2030, that's real.
That's real. And here's what they're doing. First, let's talk first about the cars. No one voted for that. Gavin Newsom in California did an executive order. The California Air Resources Board, an unelected, unaccountable bureaucracy, came up with the timetable, the 2035, and with strict limits going up to it. 17 states, including my home state of Virginia, have a trigger law to follow it. Our transportation secretary loves it so much, they're now looking at it as a federal mandate. The World Bank president, former President Nicholas Stern, says we have to look at timetables for ending this. So the World Bank's telling automakers the car's ending. A bank in Australia won't even give you a car loan if you want to buy a gas-powered car. We didn't vote for this. They're taking away our meat, our gas-powered cars, our free speech, and our agriculture, forcing us to eat insects. We didn't vote for any of it. We didn't vote for lockdowns. We didn't vote for mask mandates. These were all done through emergency decree, through unelected bureaucracy. That is what the Great Reset is. Think back to China one-party rule. They don't want any stinking democracy anymore.
Well, you mentioned this thing about eating insects.
Yes.
I don't know what it means, but Haywards Heath in West Sussex, very pleasant town, I've always thought, and Oxfordshire County Council and some town in the Netherlands have all banned meat. You know, we're coming out of an insane 2 years in which people have had to go around with face coverings. People haven't been allowed to hold Christmas gatherings with grandma. People haven't been allowed to visit loved ones in hospital. Yet significant numbers of politicians think the new priority now is to abolish farming.
This is huge. The United Nations came out with this as part of the net zero agenda. Even young climate activists were just interviewed in Australia, skipping school. They know we have to stop nitrogen fertilizer. Nitrogen fertilizer has been responsible for the high-yield agricultural revolution. If you care about deforestation and species extinction, you want high-yield agriculture. Otherwise, you need to clear more lands, more wild lands to grow more food. You want as much yield per acre. The United Nations embedded this net zero philosophy. So then you have, and by the way, you've heard penetrate the cabinets, Klaus Schwab. The Dutch Prime Minister, Mark Rutte,
Mark Rutte
is a protege of the World Economic Forum Young Leaders Program. And they are going after their farmers, almost 11,000 plus farmers, family, generational, on private farms. It's not the Bill Gates, China, equity asset firms, or big agribusiness going out. It's the small farmers. They're going after the Netherlands big time, to say that, because they're the #1 meat exporter in Europe. They want to collapse the meat. Bill Gates buying up farmland, #1 single largest farmland owner in America. China close at his heels. Hey, it's competition. He doesn't have a monopoly this time. But here's the thing. Bill Gates' stated goal is to make us eat synthetic, lab-grown meat. I'm not talking about the vegetable oil kind. I'm talking about grown in a lab, stem cells, fetal blood from a cow, grown for months, artificial dye, 3D printed by the World Economic Forum. You can print your dinner, a few kilograms a minute to print your steak, fake meat at night.
Yeah, the computer software is made in China around the back of the Wuhan Institute of Agriculture. It's all going to work out well.